This is Play-by-Playcast.
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
The podcast about play-by-play guys. For play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodett. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel.
Joel?
Joel, with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back into another episode of PXPcast, Play-by-Playcast. My name is Joel Godet. This is the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster, a professional development pod that dives into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparation of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. And while it is very March Madness-y right now, we continue our focus on baseball. Spring training is also going on. It's one of those things where, depending on what your world is in this business, you're living a very different life at the moment. Some of us are engaged in college basketball frenzy. I detailed last week what my last week has now been like, going to Pittsburgh and then Vegas, and right now I'm sitting here in Cleveland, Ohio for the Mid-American Conference Tournament. But if you're a baseball person, like, you might be kicking up in Florida right now. Day game at noon. That thing's over. Got to kill some time once you get to about 5 o'clock. Roll to the beach. Wake up, do it all over again the next day. Very different mindset with the start of baseball season rolling around. Personally, for me, start of my baseball season is next Tuesday when Ball State takes on Purdue. So, as I've said a couple of times, wanted to start to get myself into a baseball on television mindset, because for me, it's something I've never done before. That's why Karl Ravech was our guest last week to dive into his experiences at ESPN, and it's why Rich Waltz is our guest this week. I actually met Rich 2 days ago. We taped this podcast 2 weeks ago. I had reached out to Rich on a whim, asked if he wanted to be a guest on the show, and then it turns out I was doing the women's tournament for CBS Sports Network for the Mountain West. He was doing the men's. So we met at a casino, and Andrew Catalan was there, and he brings me over and goes, "Rich, this is Joel. You're going to be on his podcast." And after about a 2-second pause, we all realized who each other was, or who each other were. But had a good conversation with Rich then. Got carded by a bouncer who looked at my ID and then said, "Wow, good for you," and handed it back to me. So Father Time is still on my side. But it was fun to talk to Rich and meet him in person, and it was really fun to talk to Rich and do this podcast as well. It is one of the cooler, nichiest pods we've done. Like, we really get into the how-to of calling baseball, and it was fun. Like, you're going to enjoy this if you're a baseball guy. If you're not a baseball guy, you're going to really get a kick out of this conversation. If you don't know who Rich is, spent the longest of times as the voice of the Florida Marlins, the Miami Marlins on television, and now does a ton of different things with CBS Sports Network and a whole bunch of different outlets. MLB Network as well, he was involved with last year, filled in for John Miller for a little bit last year with the San Francisco Giants. Rich Waltz is one of the guys who has been around the block in baseball, one of the really good ones as well. So let's dive right into it. With Rich Waltz, he is our guest on episode number, I knew I was going to back myself into that corner, 143 of Play-by-Playcast. Take a listen.
Well, it's great to be on the podcast, and if you want to start with baseball on television, I think any play-by-play announcer learns when you switch from radio to TV that radio is descriptive and television is narrative, and there's some description in the narrative, but you're essentially following along with everybody who's watching. So whatever's on the screen at home, that's how you have to call the play or call what's happening through that. You can't wander off and say something's happening out in right field or there's a commotion in the dugout when the picture or the cameras are not there, because then people will be saying, well, why is that person talking about something that I can't see? So I think the challenge for someone that's done a lot of radio on television, when you get to television, is it's narrative, and there's a lot of things that are redundant if you are descriptive, because people can see that. And so you have to, number one, there's a lot less talking in terms of amount of words. But that doesn't mean that it's any easier. It doesn't mean that it's any harder. It's just different. There's just different skills. The ability to put a caption to a picture is important. You still call plays while watching the field and like you would on radio, but you don't have to be as descriptive in describing exactly where the ball's going, exactly where the fielder is or the runner is, because people can see that. So it's a little more relaxed, but you really have to make your words count on television. You have to use an economy of words, and they have to really fit, or else there's too much verbiage, there's too many words, and that gets in the way. It lends itself, I think television lends itself much more to conversation, and probably puts more emphasis on the analyst. It gives the analyst more time, because if you're on radio with an analyst, that analyst has to be in and out before the pitch is thrown, and there's a lot less room for the analyst. Whereas in television, there's an opportunity for the analyst to teach and inform, both because there's more room and because you have pictures and replays and tools to do that.
Easier to fall into that description trap too if you're doing baseball on TV versus basketball on television or other sports where maybe time is less plentiful.
Well, yeah, I think you have to make a conscious effort when you move from radio to television, and the reverse is true too. I was reminded of that this last summer. I filled in for the Giants on both radio and TV, and their format, you literally changed in the middle of the game from radio to television, and then television back to radio. And that is when you walk into the radio booth, at least I try to just remind myself, nobody can see what you're talking about. So you have to describe everything and have that flowing conversation that people are used to, because baseball is so relaxed. And then when you make the move from radio over to television, you have to remember, not only do you have an analyst that's got more room, but all of a sudden the crowd and the noise of the crowd is, I think, a bigger part on television than it is on radio. And you've got to give the game room to breathe on television, in my opinion. And look, I'm sure with anyone that's been on the podcast, or anyone that talks about broadcasting or broadcasters, it's subjective. Everybody has their taste. Some people it's like walking to Baskin Robbins. You and I could walk in and you would want mint chip and I'd want strawberry or whatever. And neither of us is wrong. It's just that's what we want, and that's what we like.
How'd you like doing both in one game?
I had done it before. I came up, I was a college baseball player, and so I didn't really study broadcasting, and found my way to the minor leagues to be a broadcaster. So I came up, spent 6 years in minor league baseball and 4 years in minor league hockey, which really was, for me, great. It was essentially graduate school, or the way I learned how to call games. And so I ended up in Seattle. My first job out in the big leagues was as a pre and post game on radio. That turned into pregame television and fill-in play-by-play. And the Mariners at that time rotated their guys like the old school, when teams had only 20 or 30 games on television. They still did it, even though they had 140 or whatever on. And that was the Mariners rotation was you would start the game on television, do the first 4.5 on TV, and then hop over and do the last 4.5 on radio. So being able to do that in the middle of the game early in my career in Seattle really helped. I didn't have to do that in Miami. I was the lead television play-by-play, and so I didn't have to slide back in. But every now and then I would get a call to do it, like a college football game or something like that on radio. So that was a quick reminder. It's weird. I mean, I think that, one of the challenges when you do switch in the middle of the game is that you don't tell the same stories.
Yeah.
Or unload your cannon on. It's like you just don't want to be repetitive. And the weird thing is, and I don't know how you fix this other than have a quick conversation in the hallway with John Miller or Dave Niehaus or whoever you're switching with. What did you talk about? And you stay away from that because you don't want to talk about the same thing that the other announcer did. So it's a difficult thing, and I think very few teams do it now because of that.
What was the education like? How did you learn how to do this all once you ventured out and you were doing minor league baseball and hockey? Who'd you learn from, and how'd you learn it?
Well, I wanted to play, and I was a good college shortstop and didn't get drafted. And rather than go to law school, I just had this burning desire to get to the big leagues. And I decided, I looked around at what jobs there were in the big leagues. And at that time, I was just a little older than the, when Billy Beane and all of a sudden some of the Ivy League guys who weren't minor league or major league players started to run things in front offices and stuff. So I decided, hey, I can get there as a broadcaster, and I was stupid enough to think that I could do it. I had no idea how hard it would be and what the odds were. And I did a little bit of stuff on the student station. I went to UC Davis. It's where I played, and just got enough of a little bit of football and basketball on the student station tape, not knowing it at all what I was doing, and talked my way into a minor league hockey job in Spokane, Washington. Once I got there, it was, essentially do the game, whether it was hockey or minor league baseball. And then I did Eastern Washington football and basketball while I was there, as well as do the game, listen to the tape. What do you like? What don't you like? And find some people in the business that you don't want to imitate, but you want to emulate. There are certain things that announcer does that you like that fits with your style. Or that there's a practice that they do that really you like, and learn from it and maybe try to incorporate it. And then, look, when you're doing minor league baseball and making absolutely no money, and riding the buses and doing all that stuff, you're motivated to get the heck out of there. And for me, I just leaned on all of my experience as an athlete, both in college and in high school, in the other sports, football and basketball. And that was, how do I get better? And how do I, the only way I could advance as an athlete to get playing time was to get better, was to be better than my competition in practice and in games. And to do that, you had to work at the skills that you lacked. And so, I was pretty realistic as an athlete when you talk to a coach or a scout or whatever and say, what don't I have? What do I need to do better? And that's kind of the approach that I took in the minor leagues. And there were a few broadcasters that I liked that listened to tapes and sent critiques in. And then once I got into regional television, it was the same thing. You find producers or executives or even announcers that you trust, and send them your stuff and say, hey, give me just some thoughts and things I can clean up, things you like. I think that's important too when you're asking for a critique as a young broadcaster, is not only what can I do better, but what do you like, so that you don't change that, so that you recognize this is good, I do this well, and you can move on. And then, every night I tried to get better. Every night it was, I'm working on being a little more descriptive of pitches. Tonight I'm working on being able to weave a story in and out. Tonight, I'm working on having a little more personal information on the player. And once you get better at something, you move on to the next. That's the only way that I look. I had absolutely no connections in the business. I didn't go to a school that produced broadcasters. I didn't have a lot of friends in the business. So the only thing that I could think of to advance would be just get better, and just try to get better and be ready if and when you got an opportunity to move up. And I've, so far so good.
As a former player, that part of it intrigues me, just from the standpoint of, like, I played baseball until I was in ninth grade and I was terrible. What's a high-end level baseball player or professional baseball player think of? Like, what do we miss as broadcasters in their eyes that would maybe paint the game in a better picture that players see or people close to the game see that maybe we don't initially?
I think the one thing you learn my experience as a player really has helped me in all of the sports that I broadcast, especially baseball, because that's where I went the highest as an athlete. But one thing I've always felt and have always practiced is, especially when doing baseball, nobody wants to hear me talk strategy. Nobody wants to hear me talk about a daylight play at second base, or how to hold a slider, or how do you hit a ball to right field, or all those things that, certainly rudimentary knowledge I have in terms of having to do it.
Sure.
The person sitting next to you is the one that, but it has helped me immensely know how to dig that out of an analyst, know what questions to ask, terminology. And the other thing that was really helpful to me was all of the managers and the coaches that I was with in the minor leagues. I asked a ton of questions and learned more about the game in terms of managing. Why did you do this? Why did you do that? What did you think about before you did that? And even in the big leagues, in my time with Lou Piniella in Seattle and the different managers in Miami, the one thing that was really, I think that a lot of broadcasters maybe don't realize, and I'm sure, and most fans don't realize either, is all the things that go into a decision, whether it's to change your defense in basketball, hit and run, pinch hit, do something in baseball. When you talk to a manager, oftentimes if you're doing a game games for a team on a daily basis, the cool thing is the next day, if you have a good relationship with the manager, you can go into the manager's office and ask Don Mattingly or Jack McKeon or Lou Piniella, what went into your decision. You don't want to say what the hell were you thinking in the eighth inning, but what went into that decision in the eighth inning, because if it didn't work out, that manager that night, from all of the media, the questions were, why did you bunt? Why didn't you run? Why did you pinch hit for Olerud? Why? And the manager doesn't really have time, or doesn't really want to tell everybody why, because the guy that he was out there was sick. The guy that was out there jammed his thumb sliding into second base. They didn't want to bunt because the next guy up wasn't a good matchup. There's like 7 or 8 things that go into making a move in baseball that I think on a lot of broadcasts you just scratch the surface of, and fans or young broadcasters don't know that. My partner in Miami, Tommy Hutton, taught me a great way to do it. He said, you don't second guess a manager, you first guess a manager. So before the play happens, while the decision is being made, you give all of the choices, and you give all of the pluses and the minuses. Well, he could bring the lefty in here. If he does that, though, the Braves have got Jeff Francoeur on the end of their bench, and he eats lefties alive. Or you could stay with the righty, but if you stay with the righty, Nick Markakis is red hot. So by first guessing, you give all the options that a manager can do, why he would do one thing, why he might not do another, and the result oftentimes answers whatever questions you have. So I'm sorry that was a long-winded way to get through that.
No, that was perfect. And I didn't even the stuff about first guessing is awesome too, because I feel like I think a lot of times as broadcasters we often think about how you analyze a situation, especially when you work by yourself and you don't have that person next to you. But instead of suggesting, well, this is what you've got to do here, is just laying out all of the potential options and seeing where it goes, and kind of treating it as like one of those create your own adventure books, I think is really interesting.
Right, and the important thing too is if you're the voice of a team, is the next day. Many people that are listening or watching your game tonight watched last night's game, and they want to know, why didn't you run with Hanley Ramirez in the 8th inning when you needed a run and Hanley had stolen 12 straight bases, or why didn't you bunt with the pitcher up there? Why didn't you do this? And the thing that you find out the next day when you talk to the manager, it can be as simple as a player didn't know the signs or a player missed the signs. Now, the manager doesn't want you to talk about that because he doesn't want to bury the player. But sometimes it's it's things that you never thought of, and it's the simplest things. But I think the important thing is the next day when that player comes up, if you've got the inside on what happened last night with strategy or why a manager did something, that's a great story to tell. That's the stuff that oftentimes you don't read in the newspaper, and oftentimes people don't have. One of the things that's changed in our industry over the last 7 to 10 years is that anyone sitting at home watching a game, whether it's college basketball, NBA, Major League Baseball, college football, they have as much access to all of the stats and all the information that you do. In fact, they can get there faster than you can because you're calling the game. But what they don't have is the access. They don't have the ability to go talk to a Kyle Seager and find out what happened during that at bat or what happened on the bang bang play at third base. They don't have the ability to go talk to Chuck Hernandez, the pitching coach of the Braves, and find out what his starter throws or what he's been working on in the bullpen. They don't have the ability to go talk to the opposing manager and find out what he thinks of your players. I think that's the stuff that, for me, and again, it's all subjective, but for me, that's the stuff that fills up my spotting chart, scorebook, boards for basketball, rather than this guy shoots 40% in the last 3 minutes of a game, or he's averaging 2 assists a game and 2 rebounds a game. I want to know, why is he in the game at this point? What does he do well? What does his coach think of him? What's his, what's he done in this spot in terms of, has he had any big moments in another game? That's the stuff that viewers and listeners don't have access to.
How do you get that information efficiently from the standpoint of, like, if we're doing a baseball game and you've got 25 guys and you want to know minutia about 25 guys, or you're doing a basketball game and you've got 12 guys, and to not have to sit down with a coach and get a little something on everybody, like, what's the best approach to tackle it so you've got your arsenal loaded, but at the same time you've also done it in an efficient manner for your time and everyone else's?
Well, I don't know. Obviously, you have to be efficient. But, I mean, for instance, I did a college basketball game last night, Cincinnati at SMU. And literally, I sat with Mick Cronin and Dan Dickow, my analyst, and we went through his roster. I went through his starters and his first couple bench players. Okay. And then from the sports information director and from an assistant coach, we also got some information on other players. What do they do well? What's their, when this guy's getting 10 minutes a game, what are you looking for from him?
Gotcha.
Is it rebounding? Is it defense? Jaron Cumberland has been in a shooting slump for Cincinnati. Want to know why? Okay, ask Mick Cronin. What's been going on? And Mick Cronin's answer was he's been getting the daylights beat out of him. Defenses have been hanging on him. Defenses have been chipping him and really physical with him. And that's kind of knocked him off of his game. So you look for that. Now you've got that information. Now you start looking for that in the game. So for basketball, that's how I do it. I literally go to shoot around and talk to the coaches. If the head coach is a guy that has time, and I want a little something about each player from that coach. What do you like? What's he working on? What's he mean to your team? if that coach doesn't have a lot of time, then an assistant coach will give that to you. Gladly will give that to you as well. And a good sports information director can connect dots as well. Baseball-wise, I always liked, for a major league game, I like to do a one sheet with, the 11 or 12 position players on it with their age, their college or their hometown, awards, year they had last year, nuggets about their career and such. And then I'll go through the notes and highlight anything that's of late. He's hitting 8 of his last 9. He's 0 for his last 19. Sometimes I'll jot that down onto my score sheet. Sometimes I'll just keep the notes there with the highlighted stuff and know where to get it. And then that's in preparation for the game. But then, go down and talk to the hitting coach about, hey, this guy's hot. What's he doing well? This guy's struggling. One of the questions you always get is, what do you do when you are the team that you're covering has got a player that's struggling and hurting the team or really, and how do you handle that? It's hard because you have to report that he's 0 for his last 5, he's 0 for 5 tonight and 0 for his last 15. That's part of the story, right? You've got to do that. But rather than just keep burying the guy with numbers like that, I think it's incumbent upon you, and I think fans want to know, why is he struggling? Go talk to the hitting coach. Go talk to the player and say, hey, I know you're struggling. I've seen you, when you're hot and obviously you're struggling. Anything that you're working on, anything that we should look for tonight. If you have a good relationship with the player oftentimes will tell you that. But the hitting coach will tell you that too. Or he'll tell you, hey, I remember when Stanton would get in those funks of chasing breaking balls. One of the drills they would do is he would not take live batting practice. He'd just go into the cage. He'd turn the jugs gun on that threw sliders, and he'd have him just feed slider. And every now and then when one crept over the plate, he'd bang it. And he would do that constantly to get himself out of that. Well, that became part of his story. And whenever he would struggle, you immediately would go to a Frank Menachino or a Barry Bonds or whoever was working with him at the time and find out, hey, are you guys doing that drill? What are the things that you see? So that you can, because pitchers go through slumps and hitters go through slumps, and the ability to relate to everybody what exactly that hitter is struggling with or what they're trying to do to get out of it, that helps set the stage for when they do get out of it. When all of a sudden you see a guy hit a ball to right field or hit a ball hard on the ground or just make solid contact or even take a great walk and see the ball better, that gives you that feeds into that storyline of that player trying to bounce back.
Wanted to pick your brain about the physical calling of the game too, and the thing that struck out immediately is, if you Google your name, your interview on MLB Network pops up where they play the clip of Chris Russo, giving you 5 stars on the play where I guess then Mike Stanton comes around and scores. And they talked about being basically very no-frillsy in a positive way of like, listen, it's detailed, it's accurate, but there's nothing exceptional about it that makes it like this flowery, awesome thing. It's just like, I got the information I needed, I got the energy I needed, like the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and it was perfect. And then like you can flip through on Twitter and find other calls of yours that are just the same, like, here's the deal. Where did that, and this goes back, I guess, a little bit to what we talked about with the work in the minor leagues, but where did that come from of like not needing the desire to say the thing that's going to get clipped and put on SportsCenter, but to say the thing that's right in the moment?
Well, I think if you say the thing that's right in the moment and you say it in the right way, it'll make its way onto SportsCenter or Chris Russo's show. So I would differ with you on that. I would think if you nail the call,
fair,
and you give it the proper amount of emotion, and if you give it the proper amount of crowd noise and all of that, I think it will stand out. I think it stands out for that reason that you've nailed it. You gave it the proper, the emotion has to be in context. you can't be emotional about a home run that puts your team up 6-0. You can't have the same emotion as you do in a play like that, which was, I believe, a walk-off, I think.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate play. And I think that was a ball in the gap too. So it's like, that's a play where the suspense builds. So, ball off the bat, the game's on the line, it's in the gap. Is he going to score? Who gets to the ball first in the outfield? Are they going to send him? They're sending him. Here comes the relay throw. So all of those things you have to give that proper context to build to your, to the outcome. And the outcome is going to be incredible one way or the other. If he's out, I'm never a guy, and again, it's all subjective. I do not like the call where my dog died, someone, like if he's thrown out in that case, to me, the call is of surprise and wow, or, oh, he's out and he's out. What a great tag. What a great throw. And we go to extra innings instead of, and he's out. So we're going to extra innings. So I think you have to give that justice too. I think it comes from just your personal style and people that when I suddenly at age 22 or 23 decided to do this, like I said, I looked around at other broadcasters, that guys that I liked and kind of that fit my style. And so, I've never really had like a home run call. The one call that I had was the ugly call,
yeah.
and that popped out because of a story.
Sure.
And probably 2 or 3 years after I was using it, I regretted it, to be honest with you, because it was like, and then I started just using it when it was a big home run, not just any home run. And I even used it when he came back as a Brave and homered against Miami too. So no, I mean, I think as an announcer, what I try to do is make every call unique because every play is unique. With a Stanton home run, you have to describe it. Is it a laser beam to left? Is it a high towering drive to center? Is it an opposite field shot that was 20 feet off the ground? All of those things change, I think, your call and your description.
Where does your mind go on a play like that? And I mean, to stick with that, the Stanton play in particular, the camera never shows him running until he comes down the third baseline and is about to score. But your call mentions where he is on the base paths as we see the ball rolling to the outfield wall.
Yeah.
So where is your brain to make sure you're hitting all the right points, even if we can't see it?
Well, I think that's a great case of needing to be descriptive in television and leaning a little bit on your radio background is that very case. Because you have to remember that the mechanics of baseball on television are very different than any other sport. It's the only sport on television where they cut away, they have to follow the ball with different camera cuts. Whereas in other sports, it's one camera that's just following the play. So you have to know that with the ball in the gap, everybody, if you're at home, since you're at home, you can't watch like you would if you're at the ballpark. If I'm at the ballpark or if I'm in the dugout and the ball's in the gap and the winning run's at first, the first thing I want to see when I see the ball in the gap is find the runner. Where's the runner? Does he have a chance to score? And you're, as an announcer, thinking, not back to that play in particular, but a play like it, ball's in the gap. You have an idea that the runner got a pretty good jump. You know what kind of speed that runner has. So those are two bits of information that will help you. Once the ball's by the outfielder to the wall, you have to check where the runner is. And then you also, you check back to see who's picked the ball up and if the relay's coming home or relay's on its way. And then you have to find the third base coach and find out if he's sending the runner. And I think in that call or in most calls, I'll incorporate a third base coach, whether it's they'll send him or if you, if it's your third base coach on the team that you're broadcasting for and you know his name and fans know his name, you can drop in a Perry Hill or whoever is sending the runner. Because that's part of the suspense, because people can't see that. At that, in television, that shot is probably of the relay throw coming to the shortstop. And in that moment, everybody at home is wondering, are they going to send him? Well, you have to answer that, because that all of a sudden brings everybody to the edge of their seat. And it brings you to the edge of your seat, right? So at that point, usually the camera cut is to the runner around third or a rounding third. That's usually the timing of it. So by then, the ball's in the gap. Everybody knows that. Up with the ball is whoever. Ozuna, whoever's coming to third. They're going to send him, and all of a sudden it's on, and then the relay throw, and then the play at the plate. So, I mean, physically, you're watching a lot of different things. But I think if you work in television, call baseball and television, you kind of learn the rhythm of the camera cuts too, and what they show. But in that case, you're not necessarily watching through the monitor on a bang play like that. You're watching the field.
How's working with an analyst different in baseball than in basketball or football or any other sport where it's still conversational but a little bit faster, where you've got the time to tell stories and interact and converse in baseball?
I think it's all format and it's all timing. I think the most regimented is football, because it's play. If you're television, it's play. Generally, it's replay. It's reset down, snap, play. It's like going like that, and it's I worked football this year with Aaron Murray, and I've been blessed to work with some really good analysts, Adam Archuleta, Rod Gilmore, a lot of the ESPN guys doing college football. And they know they've got 12 to 15 seconds to sum up the play, make their comment, and then, quarterback's taking this. I like hearing an analyst talk all the way up to almost the snap, and even sometimes the snap in television, because now you can see it's 3rd and 5 on the screen. You don't really need to do too much before the snap, other than maybe drop in the down and distance. Basketballs, if it's again, I like a conversational broadcast, so I like hearing an analyst when the ball's moving around the perimeter telling me about how the zone moves, or where the opening is going to be, or where the mismatch is, or watch for Jones coming off the stagger screen on the baseline. I like that a lot, rather than me as an announcer on television talking about the players with the ball passing it around the perimeter. Baseball is different because you nailed it. There's more conversation, and it's more relaxed, and there's more storytelling. You just have to make sure that you have chemistry enough that you know each other's strengths, and I like looking at the analysts, whatever sport I do, in terms of eye contact during the game and during play and whatever. So you get a sense of when to stop and when to come back in, and you get into a really nice rhythm, I think, in baseball, if you've got chemistry with the person you're working with.
How much do you talk ahead of time about things that are on your mind, things you want for that game, or do you just kind of let it flow a little bit?
A little of both. When I had when I was doing Major League Baseball on a daily basis, especially with Tommy Hutton, or a guy like Eduardo Perez, or even Todd Hollinsworth, we were homework intensive. We liked we were down on the field, and oftentimes it was, hey, you go talk to the Phillies pitching coach, Rich Doobie. I'll go talk to Mattingly, and then I'll check in on Yelich's hamstring. And so by the time you get back up to the booth, you trade information. Hey, I found out this, I found out that. And then if you're talking to other broadcasters or scouts or people in the booth, oftentimes you're both there for the same conversation. A lot of times you have the same information that the other guy does. And I think the key there is if you have the same information as your analyst, you know what he knows what you know, is that you let each other contribute to the story. You let each other contribute to the note. You don't hog the, I talked to Don Mattingly about the play last night and this happened, or I was visiting with Bruce Bochy and Bochy was talking about he's going to experiment today and let Bumgarner go 6 and then this, that, and the other, because if your analyst has information on that too, start it. Let the analyst finish it. Or if the analyst says, has a story or talks about something that you know, and you have a little bit more information to add to it, or a stat or something to tie a bow on it, do that, because it, I think it adds to the chemistry and it draws it. You get trust from an analyst that way. They'll trust that you aren't going to burn their best stuff, that you will let them be part of the story, or you'll let them tell the best part of the story. Yeah. And it's funny. I don't like to, on television, oftentimes I don't like to rehearse the open, and I don't want to know what the analyst is going to say in the open. Sure. Oftentimes we'll discuss, like an open I did last night with Dan Dickow. We kind of discussed, all right, I know we're going to talk about McMurray of SMU and Jennifer, the point guard of Cincinnati. I did not want to know what he said, because I wanted to genuinely react on camera during the open to what he said. I find that if you rehearse and you go over every little thing, it just squeezes all the life out of it and squeezes all the spontaneity out of it. And for that matter, squeezes the fun out of it. Yeah. So, but yeah, we'll talk about, hey, if there's a story or a controversy or something like that, you want to be on the same page. But at the same time, when I do a basketball game with a Bob Wenzel or Steve Lapis, or a baseball game with Eduardo Perez or someone like that, I have a pretty good idea of what they know, and they have a pretty good idea of what I know, and a lot of it is the same stuff. So share that information, and as Steve Lavin will say 8 times a night, share the sugar on that. So, and I say that affectionately, having worked with Lav.
Rich, if people want to find you on social media, or if they want to track down a game of yours, how do they find more Rich Waltz in their life?
Well, look, on social, I do some social media. I'm not a big opinion guy on social media, but I will engage with fans. So just at Rich Waltz on Twitter is my social media outlet. And then I'll be doing college basketball for CBS Sports Network, and not really sure what I'll be doing in the end of March. And baseball for me right now is an open book. I think I'll be doing some stuff for MLB Network, but I just don't know. So you have to, with what happened to me a year ago, you have to kind of embrace the uncertainty, which I've done, and which has led me to some really cool, fun stuff over the last year and a half.
What's the most fun thing or random thing that's popped up in the last year and a half?
Oh boy, it's the NBA playoffs on Turner's virtual reality was really fun because I had not had a chance to really do much NBA, and then all of a sudden you are watching the Warriors and the Rockets and doing an NBA playoff game, which is like
jumping at you too.
Yeah, and it's like, hey, this NBA stuff is a lot of fun. What other thing has popped? Even the Facebook games that I did that were produced by MLB Network last year were fun because it's a different format. So there were no commercials, and you got to do a lot of cool stuff, long form interviews with managers, coaches, players live during the telecast. And you got to work with some terrific analysts around baseball, Oral Hershiser, Mike Krukow, people like that. That was cool too. And I never imagined, doors pop open that you didn't really think would pop open, and you'll get a call out of the blue about an event or something, and it's like, yeah, that sounds like fun. Let's do that. But I'd certainly like to do. The goal is for me is to get back into Major League Baseball on a full-time basis. As it was last year, the MLB Network people were great to me, and the games that I did, the Facebook and the showcase games, and then filling in for the Giants, that was a lot of fun too. So and the bottom line is this: we get paid to go to games.
Yep.
So whether it's a big game, or whether it's an NBA playoff game or a Major League baseball game, or it's a mid-major basketball game in the snow somewhere, you have to, I think, walk into that arena or stadium or ballpark and look around and just realize you're getting paid to go to a game. You're getting paid to work at a game. And that's when you start out, for everyone that's listening to this, most of you have started out in small places at small venues, programs, players you've never heard of, not much money. You're hoping that they put a pizza or some hot dogs in the press room for dinner. So I think you have to keep that in mind wherever you go and whatever you do.
All right, that's Rich Waltz joining us here on Play-by-Playcast. Primed and ready for baseball. I'll let you know how my first game goes on Tuesday next week, or I guess on this podcast next Friday next week. When our guest, I haven't taped it yet, hopefully will be Robert Lee from ESPN. He's in Cleveland doing the MAC men's final, so hopefully we'll get a chance to sit down and chat it out a little bit before the weekend is out and before next week's episode comes out as well. If it's not Robert, then we didn't get a chance to do that, and we'll find out who the guest is. But until next week, we say so long. This is PXPcast. My name is Joel Godet. Find us on social media. I always forget that, at PXPcast. Rate and review the podcast, and now we're out of time. So we're out.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.